The practice was for many years that someone is appointed in a political office with no experience in that department, and then that person is permanently appointed, seconded to the department, but has no function in that department. We have a lot of those officials still in our government departments that do not do any work. It's them that we should look at, not the public official that does do his job, not the public official that does have a contribution to society. Thank you, Chair, and to the members of the media, community leaders and stakeholders. A word of welcome and thank you for your presence. And allow me an opportunity to briefly outline the focus areas and what the Standing Committee on the Auditor General is busy with. It's not a committee that you hear of often. We also dealt a very bad hand. We have a Friday slot, which means that we meet on a Friday, and that's why I don't see a lot of your faces there, but I have to be there, and my members have to be there. But the work that we do is very important, as when we look at Chapter 9 institutions, then they are paramount to the constitutional democracy of South Africa. And the Auditor General is one of them. And without an independent Supreme Auditor, you don't have correct oversight and you can't ensure accountability. And what this committee and the Standing Committee on the Auditor General has to do, and its mandate is very clear out of the Public Audit Act, is to provide oversight over the Auditor General, but also to strengthen and protect the Auditor General. We've seen, and we must be honest, that there's been Chapter 9 institutions that have suffered a bad reputation, which are not regarded as independent, which have a bad rep and a lot of impediments from bad media reports and scandals and so forth. The Auditor General is not one of those. Currently, it has a very good reputation. There's a lot of faith in the institution, and there's no impediments and scandals up until now. But we always have to still ensure that that might not happen in future. There is a few risks and there's a few threats. And as a committee, we are very serious about addressing those problem areas that might come to threaten the independence and functionality of the Auditor General in the near future. The first one is the financial sustainability. We must remember that the Auditor General is currently regarded as the most independent Supreme Auditor on the globe. And one of the reasons is the funding model. And what the funding model entails is that there's no budget appropriated by politicians to the Auditor General. The Auditor General charges audit fees to those that she audits. So a municipality has to pay an audit fee. And that ensures independence and impartiality. But currently we sit with outstanding audit fees of especially financially distressed municipalities, which are currently totaling more than R1 billion. Now, colleagues spoke about the outstanding debt of municipalities and entities to Eskom. A few years ago, not even 10 years ago, the outstanding debt to Eskom, colleagues, were not even R1 billion. And now we're talking about 90 billion, more than 90 billion. That's how quickly outstanding debt can escalate and accumulate and become a very big problem. The committee feels very strongly that we need more interventions on this outstanding debt. That's why we've already engaged with different stakeholders and especially with National Treasury to look at the funding model, protecting the independence, but also intervening on this outstanding debt that's accumulating and becoming more and more each financial year. We know that municipalities are in such a dire state, the majority of municipalities, that a lot of those audit fees will never be able to really be recuperated and be paid. We need to address that threat. We also need to look at what the outcomes, audit outcomes, the functionality of the Auditor General really means to the people of South Africa. How does it translate? How does an audit outcome translate to service delivery? We have focused for very long on clean audits. But what we must be honest about is that a clean audit only means that the debits and credits are dealt with, that there's proof of everything. And I always joke, but it's really not a joke, that you can get a clean audit and you will get a clean audit, even if you have the most severe corruption, a lot of wasteful expenditure, no value for money on your infrastructure projects, but you can get a clean audit if you have proof of all your misspending. That's all a clean audit means. And if we don't have a culture shift where we actually go and look at what the performance of a municipality, of a government department is, our people will stay in the state they are, suffering will continue. We need to address that. And the Auditor General is busy with a culture shift in that regard, looking at and plotting government departments and entities and municipalities with regards to what harm they are doing. Are they actually performing not only debits and credits, but how they are actually performing and delivering services? And we need to support them in that. And then we need to look at funds. How can we ensure that the Auditor General can do that, can perform performance audits, can and do not only fulfill a checkbox exercise of providing a report to Parliament and we scrutinize it, but we don't actually look at if there is not only, or if the compliance is not only malicious, but that there is actual translation of money spent, taxpayers' money spent, and that translates into good service delivery and proper infrastructure, which we need to get this country going, to get economic growth, to get employment going, and to get inequality at rest. We need to look at those focus areas, and the committee is busy with that. The other very important matter is the Public Audit Act that was amended in 2008, which provides more powers to the Auditor General in terms of acting on material irregularities at auditees if an accounting officer fails to do so. And there's many cases where there's irregularities, material as such, but that the accounting officer does nothing to actually get that money back and to act against the official that was responsible. So these new powers gives the Auditor General that function. Once again, we need to support the Auditor General in that mandate and ensure that that translates into actual successes. Currently, there's been about 4 billion rand already saved or recovered or prevented in financial losses because of these powers that the Auditor General now has. But where the committee also has a role to play and where we are trying to play that role and scrutinize is cases that are handed over by the AGSA to law enforcement agencies, but then just don't go any further. We need consequence management, and that is where these powers needs to translate into consequences and actual consequences for those who transgress. Because these transgressions are stealing from the most vulnerable. It's stealing the future out of the hands of South Africans. And that's why the Standing Committee is prioritizing this and looking at all these areas to protect the independence of the Auditor General, to provide more functionality with regards to performance audits, and then also to enhance these functions with regards to material irregularities so that there is and are better consequence management. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Mercedes, I'm really glad that you've asked those questions. It's time to be frank with everyone. We are seeing now the outcome of 10 to 15 years of bad decisions. The country is nearly, I don't want to use the word bankrupt, but it's in a very difficult financial situation. And the choice we have to make is whether we continue to borrow more against the future into a system that wastes and steals money or not. So the SABC is not the only entity that has a funding problem, a funding model problem, and a serious historical governance problem. We've gone through that. So all of that stuff with a born intellectual lecture and so on, these are the consequences that we're going through right now. So let me tell you who else has an unfunded mandate. It's a South African Defence Force. 62% of the Defence Force's mandate is unfunded. We spoke about the oceans economy. The ships of the South African Navy and the submarines used to spend over 11,000 hours at sea per year. They spend 2,000 now. There's only one operating. If anyone from anywhere wants to come and steal our fish, they can do whatever they like, bring drugs in and that sort of thing. There is no money for it. There's no money for it. And the Department of Defense has the worst audit outcomes in the entire government. So that's the scale and the kind of problem that we're dealing with. So that also means you will find in the same ecosystem, you will find entities that cannot pay the Auditor General, that cannot pay the SIU, that cannot pay their bills to the Department of Public Works and so on. There is a lot of cross debt or owing within the system because these institutions are broken. They've been mismanaged, they continue to be mismanaged. The SABC is one of those. But there are also those that have a problem with the funding model. The Road Accident Fund is another. So the Road Accident Fund gets about 42, 45 billion a year. Its liabilities exceed 340 billion. That's the Road Accident Fund. And I can go on and on and on. The municipalities that are not able to pay Eskom simply can't collect rates because they themselves administratively are broken and they're also in very poor areas. So what they do, they take the money from prepaid electricity because people pay prepaid, they use it for salaries and other things, and they don't pay Eskom. So if that money, as it is possible to do, is taken from the equitable share of those municipalities, it means there might be some service delivery items that will not be done. So I just want us to get us to understand the extent of the funding problem in South Africa. Let me give you another example, last example. I asked the Minister of Transport how much between PRASA and Transnet is needed to get them to a point where they meet their constitutional mandate. It's about 240 billion. Just between those two institutions alone, 240 billion. PRASA itself is broken and has been broken for years. They should be running between Naledi, for instance, and Park Station. They should be running several trains per hour. But a trip from Naledi to Park Station takes an hour 15 minutes to an hour 20 minutes instead of 35 minutes. Why? Because there's no fencing. The pairways, which is the railway, the rails themselves, need fixing. There is no electronic signaling equipment, so the trains can collide. So the trains are really slow. They go at 40 to 60 k's per hour instead of 130 k's per hour. They get full. They get hot. We need to find that money somewhere. Now, Honorable Maimane told you out of every rand where that money goes. South Africa pays 1.3 to 1.4 billion servicing debt per day. Each day. That's how much we pay. It's money that was borrowed, wasted, stolen. Transnet has a debt, among others. There is 60 billion from Transnet that they owe, that they're continuing to service. It was to buy locomotives. They're not here. They were in that state capture mess and the contracts got cancelled and that sort of thing. So Transnet can't meet its mandate. It's paying debt to banks and pension funds for infrastructure that is not even at Transnet. So I'm trying to say it's very important that we understand the scale of the financial problem we're dealing with and the problems with governance and why it's important that we make the focus. So I want to say to you, to Mercedes, in response to your questions, I think one of the sad outcomes of this is that many workers who are under pressure from cost of living that is too high will go without salary increases because often they're just lucky not to get retrenched. The funding model of the SABC is going to have to change because it's not just the SABC that is struggling financially. Multi-choice, you've heard. Consumer habits are changing. So we have to look at other ways in which we fund the SABC, we fund the Road Accident Fund, we fund Transnet, and so on. What is clear is that there is not enough tax in the system anymore. If I were to ask any of you, can you afford to pay any more tax? The answer will be no. So where's the money going to come from? That is a fundamental problem from a policy perspective that the government has to. And South Africans also don't want any private participation. So we're going to have to deal with the situation that we have until different policy decisions are taken. But it's important that we explain how serious this is. I wish I could say something about the bloated cabinet. The problem is our constitution says the president, once elected, has a prerogative. He or she can have 12 ministers, 16, 60. It's not for parliament, unfortunately, to instruct the president on how many ministers they would have. If you were to ask me, would I have a big cabinet? The answer is no. But I'm not the president. And the constitution does not allow parliament to change ministries and that sort of thing. If we want that system, we need to advocate for a constitutional change and change it. But otherwise, it is what it is. So that is the first. The second that I want to deal with is, so Dr. Snyanya, I'm not avoiding your question. I just want to place our role in context. One of the struggles I have, even with our own committee members, is that we look specifically at how money is spent and how money is accounted for. The portfolio committees deal with the policy issues in terms of whether policy A or policy B is the right policy and so on. And in that context, we don't get into that conversation. If I made a comment, I would be giving you a personal comment, which is you are absolutely correct. But you also need, in terms of having to focus right across the sort of the full set of natural resources that we have. It's not just mining, it's not just tourism, it's also the oceans. But think about what I said about the SA Navy only operating one ship and one submarine now. You know exactly what's going to happen. Anybody can come and do anything they like. And that has got an effect on how we're able to extract value out of our maritime resources and to protect them, to protect the environment, make sure there is no overfishing and so on, no pollution. Can't do any of that. That's a fact. The third I want to deal with has to do with the financials, because that was directed at me. So will we insist? So we've been given an undertaking that South African Airways will table its audited financials, will be able to complete its latest audit by the end of this month. So the Minister and SAA will come back to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts next year. But I need to say this about audits, and I'll kind of try and granularize it. When you've had the kind of instability that we've had, and for years you have not completed financial statements, what's important in an audit is that for every claim about what you've spent and what you've done, there needs to be proof that this has indeed happened. That needs people who were there when it was happening to to say that it was there, here's the memo, here are the minutes, and so on. This is what happens. How many chief executives and CFOs and so on has SAA had in the last 10 years? I lose count. So the difficulty for the Auditor General or anyone who's auditing financial statements of such a broken entity is that you are not able to ascertain the quality of the information from 2018, 2019, because the people are not here, 2019, 2020, 2021, 21, 22, and so on. So when you're dealing with a backlog of audits, you've got to go through this painstaking process so that at least you can arrive at an audit conclusion of some sort. If you don't have it, then it is difficult to conclude the audit. Honorable Wessels spoke about what a clean audit means in terms of your finances. It simply means you could prove the things that you are saying. That's it. What is often a problem in some of these entities, they can't prove. You look for certain documents, they're not there. You look for people that were there to explain what happened, they're not there, they're gone. So what I'm trying to say is we can force entities to come and explain before the committee. The reality is that the information we will get will still be junk. We must accept that. That's what will happen. It will still be junk information. And junk information is useless because you don't actually know whether it is true or not. But we commend the work that the Auditor General has done so far. They've had to do some of these audits concurrently. In other words, do multiple years at once so that they're able to deliver financial statements. And they've given us an undertaking that they will be able to do that. The final, so what I'm trying to say is that it's not just SAA refusing. The Auditor General also says, I don't have enough information to reach a conclusion. So you can go and say, but nobody can prove what you're saying is true, unfortunately. So we need to get to a point where there's sufficient information to accept the audit outcome that has been given. And that's how much these institutions have been broken. The final one I want to say on quarterly reports, because this is really important. I will make an example about the session we had last week. We had the Hawks, we had the SIU, and we had the NPA. The week before, we had the presidency. The topic of discussion was the discrepancy between whom the SIU refers for prosecution versus who's eventually prosecuted versus who's eventually found guilty. The numbers don't match. We needed to understand why. Then we speak to the presidency, which issues the proclamations, which coordinates the fight against corruption. So all of these institutions must talk to one another. Now, what do we want in the end? What we want in the end is where we get as Parliament a single report. The presidency, the NPA, the SIU, and the Hawks give us exactly the same report as to what has happened to those cases. Is everyone being held accountable? It's not just about a criminal prosecution. It is also about people that are being disciplined, people who are being blacklisted, companies that get blacklisted out of the system. We need a single report. That necessitates that we embark on the process that we did. Now, when you do things like that right across the estate, whether it is objectives, it is financial metrics, it is how fast you pay suppliers, whether tender processes are being run correctly, and so on, we are able to issue a template to each of these institutions by agreement with all of them so that they can give us good quality information. We're going to take that information, use it on an ongoing basis to ask further questions and to make recommendations to Parliament so that when we get the audit outcomes at the end of the year, we look at that same template and we look to see whether that what we've been told throughout the year matches what the Auditor General has found, and therefore what accountability and consequent management looks like. So I hope that that explains the quarterly or half-yearly reporting thing that I spoke about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll do my best to be quick. To Ms. Mercedes, your questions regarding the SABC. Look, the SABC is a public good, right? We recognize the fact that its mandate is derived in ensuring that citizens across the country are able to get news that is accurate, and all the function that the SABC is intended to do. I do think, though, it's important that its funding model needs to be reviewed, and I think that's going to be important because the process as it sits at the moment is unsustainable when you look at the appropriation that goes to the SABC. The second is that ultimately, intergovernmental payment plans cannot be a thing that is further delayed. I think that government has notoriously and historically, it's not just the SABC, but it's payment of municipalities, etc. Government departments must pay. Those are allocated within their budgets, and so there should be no delay. It's unlike a consumer who's making a choice between buying bread or paying the SABC. People must pay. I do think more than anything that, to Honorable Zibi's point, the industry is changing, and the SABC needs to be able to adjust itself consistently towards that. You'll remember the historic discussion about set-top boxes, etc. I have written to the board of SABC to say they need to account on issues of deviations because there seems to be an outweighed practice of deviations within the SABC, which speaks to efficiency of financial management. And they've given me a response on what those deviations were and what they look like, and some of it will require that we have a face-to-face engagement because there was expansion of certain contracts that I felt at the time South African suppliers could have provided the same services at a cheaper cost. To your point, I think you are correct. Looking after journalists, looking after people, public service in the medium-term budget has already allocated only 4%, between 4 to 4.5% increase over the medium term on public service. I think that in negotiations as they go forward, this issue is going to pose a profound challenge. I am watching at it over the medium term, and to the point, we've got to ensure that staff increases or salary increases don't exceed that point, or our budget is simply unsustainable. As I've explained to you, that 38 cents of every 1 rand is spent on cost of employees. If you add an above 6% increase on that, you are going to be facing difficulties because you can pay people more, but you can't have more people than being paid more, right? So you're going to have to make those binary decisions. And our view, and I've expressed this view, which was to say that in as far as the size of the cabinet, even now in the special appropriations, the presidency's budget has had to receive an increased special appropriation just to deal with the expansion of the cabinet. I hold the view that South Africa is heading fast towards a time where we have to make some tough decisions. And you can keep ministries and functions. I've asked the president directly this question, so it's no secret as to why we even sustain things like deputy ministers, etc., etc. That becomes some of the reality is the rands and cents will force us to make tough decisions. So the question is, do you want to make those tough decisions when you don't have money, or you want to make those tough decisions proactively to save money? And I'm arguing the case that we are at a point as South Africa where we have to make tough decisions now, or our whole fiscal framework is unsustainable, and our fiscal policy cannot be funded in that manner. So to that effect, it's also not just cabinet, the bloating of cabinet. It's also keeping in mind the support infrastructure that goes with every ministry. And I think there could be, I am engaging with budget offices in the BRICS member countries to establish how they do it so that you ration it accordingly. I'm not convinced, if you ask my personal opinion, I'm not convinced that every ministry must have exactly replicable support given the size of its budget. You know, if your budget is this big, then your support needs to reflect that. But if it is small, as certain budget allocations, when you look at budget votes, I'm not convinced that you need to provide the same support in that regard. You know, and even cabinet itself needs to reflect on how it operates, in the sense that I was in Botswana for the inauguration there, and it struck me how not every cabinet minister gets a special car, VIP, protection, all of the above. In South Africa, the joke is every cabinet minister is like the president, you know, as far as security, and it's not consistently true, but the point is we're going to have to think carefully about how we allocate resources. And so currently the appropriation is 600 million, and then once you begin to grow it further on from there, support stuff, it goes into the billions. And these are billions that could be used for other areas. So I think we hold a view that says that. The committee met and discussed in its report that will be tabled for Parliament's adoption tomorrow that there must be a deliberate intervention that ensures that municipalities, particularly municipalities in our consultation with SALGA, must pay for employee pension funds. It would be criminal for someone to have been working in an institution and then arrive when it comes to time to get their pension, that they can't be able to get that because the municipality has not been able to pay. So we're putting together, as is practice, once it's adopted by Parliament, a directive for Treasury. We'll need to go from there. And I think to your question about what the Money Bills Act empowers, this is one of the things that we want to be able to work on in the next in this administration. Because historically, this is the point I was trying to make, historically, you know, when the Minister of Finance makes proposals, they kind of go through. And I think now we're heading to a time where we need to really engage on these issues and show accountability and be able to push back as Parliament. So what I'm trying to get at is that Parliament is going to have to do its job so that these votes don't become ceremonial and political only, but they become purposeful in ensuring that Parliament does its job. Because when it's said and done, no one wants to see what you see in other countries, government shutdowns, a war between the executive and the legislature. No one wants to see that. But at the same time as that, I think there needs to be better consultation and interaction to make sure the expressions of the citizens are being given effect to. Otherwise, Parliament will become a ceremonial place, which is the last place you want Parliament to be. When the state capture issue was on the table, the judgment that was given against Parliament was to say to itself, it can't just be a laptop of the executive. That Parliament must exercise its role in the sense of the apex of accountability for the executive. So all of these questions, all of these bills that are being tabled have to be processed properly by Parliament. And part of the work that the committee is looking at doing is not only to say, well, what are we doing about making adjustments? For example, if any other portfolio committee was looking to make an adjustment on their budget vote, for example, that can only be processed through the appropriations committee. So my invitation to other chairs, I say to them, come to the committee. The law prescribes. Our lawmaking, especially around processing of the bill, is prescribed by law. That's why certain deadlines have to be met. That's why you can't just table the budget when you feel like it. It is prescribed in law. The amendment thereof is also prescribed in law. So if there are challenges, for example, with education and it being underfunded, the Education Portfolio Committee needs to come to the Appropriations Committee to be able to make submissions so we take the matter forward. And it would be true around other related legislation and portfolio committees. So I think the process must be taken on board, and we must give full exercise to the law in and of itself, because this is a legal instrument with legal prescribes as to how we measure it. I think I've covered the majority of the questions, bar your questions around the blue economy. I agree with Honorable Zibi that the Transport Ministry needs to be able to look at its broader infrastructure on that. My job is to look at whether the financial provisions have been made in this regard. And all I can say to you is that one of the things that as a committee we attend to is whether any government program emanating from the National Development Plan, and you can talk about government priority, we look at whether there's a relationship when a portfolio committee comes to present, where there's a relationship between its objectives, its allocation of funding. And one of the key challenges we face up to is that even the NDP targets are not being met, and some of the planning that comes into whether some of the priority expressed in the NDP finds itself in the annual performance plans. In certain instances, we're not finding the relationship between those two things. So it becomes important that when the president or anyone tables any proposal, that it's given expression into the annual performance plans so that Parliament can do its job. Because if it's not expressed there, how do you budget for it? How do you give special programs towards it? And how do you ensure that accountability is effected as an outcome? And it's part of the reason I maintain that the NDP targets are not going to be met. That is now common cause with 6 years to go to 2030. And I also do think that in terms of their expression, we note the fact that some of the annual performance plan only reflect less than 48% of some of the annual performance plans reflecting the priorities that come from the National Development Plan. So I do think what we're going to have to be vigilant on is making sure those relationships are in place. No, and I think the virtual platform questions were not directed at me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and let me be brief. The question with regards to the impact of the outstanding debt on the Auditor General and the functioning of the Auditor General. In short, currently, it does not have an impact and a negative impact. Currently, the Auditor General is functioning very well, and there's very good financial management at the institution, which means that in this, for the last financial year, there's even, with the outstanding debt, there's a surplus in the budget, which the committee approved the retention of that surplus in terms of the Act. But there is a lot of needs for digitalization of the Auditor General, which is very necessary to keep up with the changing audit environment, and then also cybersecurity threats that needs to be addressed. And everything is about money. Money is needed, funds are needed, and then once again, if this debt continues to increase, we'll have a similar situation as with the SABC, as with Eskom, where it starts small and it becomes more and more and more. But saying that, we can't operate in silos. And the AGSA and the committee, by implication, cannot in good conscience just say, but we recommend that the money be taken from equitable share from municipalities and get it in that fashion. Because we must remember what equitable share is actually meant for. Equitable share of municipalities are there to fund the provision of free water and electricity to indigents, nothing else. And if you take that money directly from the Division of Revenue and you give it to Eskom, you give it to SABC, you give it to the Auditor General, you are actually taking away from the vulnerable people that need that money, and we're moving in the wrong direction. And I think the colleagues articulated that already, that we are in trouble as a country, we are in a fiscal crisis, and then we need to operate together. We can't sacrifice, but we have, as the Honourable Maimane said, tough decisions to take. Whilst we can't sacrifice that there's any loss of functionality with regards to the Auditor General, we can't at the same time prioritize the fees of the Auditor General but not prioritize free water and electricity to those who need it, prioritize environmental needs that there are, prioritize other important priorities. So we need to find a balance, and we're in a very difficult position. But we're also in a position where we must, as South Africans, tell each other that there's always hope if we work together, if we prioritize the right priorities, that the spending priorities that's needed, we take hands and we work towards a better future. Chair, in conclusion, the Bishop asked me a question, but unfortunately that's beyond my mandate and my committee's mandate. And I think the Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance are better suited. But in my personal capacity, I would say that we always need stakeholders to engage and work together. So there should be a solution to that, and there should be a place for the community and organizations to play a role in this trouble that we are in, and addressing, like I said, those needs, the outstanding debt, the way in which municipalities function, And there we need to take hands and work together. It's the only solution. So I think it would be welcomed. And I think the Portfolio Committee on Corporate Governance is best suited. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairpersons, for your insightful, illuminating, very informative presentations, as well as the responses to the questions. I think in closing, it will be remiss of...
Hello? Hello? We've got follow-up questions.
Huh?
Follow-up questions. I didn't want to intervene to say, no, you didn't answer this question and so on. So, please.
Is there a question that was not answered?
Yes. And, you said this is an engagement. I thought you would have a second round, please.
Okay, all right.
For me as well, I thought you're going to ask a second round of questions, and I would like
Okay.
to ask some questions.
Based on demand, I'm going to ask that you ask straightforward questions. Let's not do commentary questions, and then we give the chairpersons that last opportunity to respond. Can I start with you? The questions that were not answered, and if you've got additional one.
Can you close your mic?
We can be able to hear you, Mercedes. You don't
Okay.
have to try to bully me.
All right, I just wanted to, Honorable Zibi, there are very critical points that you made, but let me start with Mr. Maimane. The issue that was raised about the SABC was about general workers. It's not about the SABC. And the question was about eating of clean orders by workers and even society. You have municipalities also that goes around boasting that they have clean audits, but there's no service delivery when you go to the communities. So in that context, I've heard you answering the question on the SABC. I've not really gotten the answer that I was asking. Mr. Zibi, you didn't answer the question. The question here is about government not paying. Yes, the public mandate of this department and so on, but there is TV license fees that has to be paid by government. There are audit fees that have to be paid by municipalities. And as far as that is concerned, when I was in that committee of the Auditor General, we heard that Treasury will pay to make sure that it pays for those municipalities. So the question here is that, what are you saying about the non-payment of the TV license? Let's leave that funding model aside. And I'm speaking to all of you as oversight committees, not as government. And when I ask the question also to yourself, ma'am, I don't expect you to answer on what the president says and so on. I want you've taken oaths of office, individually your members as well. What do you think as committees? You are oversight bodies. So that's where, but we leave it there. We're not, and also there needs to be a differentiation. You're not speaking here as government. Yes, government, there's separation of powers. So government you are the one who does that oversight over government. So I just want to, but we won't go there. So that question has not been answered. What are you saying? This money must not be paid because they're waiting for the funding model and so on. Whereas when you look at there, at the Auditor General, Treasury is going to pay. And here you have a president who said recently they must pay immediately. So I would like to know, and I will ask that question every time when I come here, has it been paid as it said immediately? And you, as oversight bodies, that is why it's brought to your attention as well. So that will be the one question. And I also, there's the issue, money owed to entities. That is the issue, the money owed. It must be paid. Government must pay. It must pay the audit fees and so on. And then the last one is here on, you are talking about there is no money. There's no money. I heard you also, Mr. Wessels, all of you. You are saying there's no money, but are you have to tighten. yes, salary increases and so on, they have to be tightened, but are you willing, because there's no money, are you going to say for this financial and next financial year, 0 salary increase? Will you advocate for it because there's no money? And then the saving starts also with yourselves. Because there are people who have not had salary increases for the past financial years. Parliamentarians continue to get that in terms of, will you tell the Remuneration Commission to say, no, 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 because of this, we will not have money. And lastly, Mr. Zibi, I heard you made something about, yes, and retrenchments, and would it be, it's almost as if be happy that you are not being retrenched. I hope I misunderstood you or I misread what you are saying, but what I read is that you say, look here, be happy that you have a job. Don't worry about the salary increase. Be happy that you have a job instead of being retrenched. That is not what should come from a member of parliament. I don't know, I misread you, but that is not the way to go, because that is what workers are being told everywhere, to say, be happy that you have a job, don't complain about salary. It doesn't work like that. So thank you, and I
All
wish you
right.
could answer me also around yourselves. Are you going to say you're going to take 0 the next
Yeah.
financial year?
Yeah,
Thanks.
you had already asked that one. The last one, ma'am?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm a representative of the National Coincide Council. My name is Princess Chantal Ravel. I'm the Western Cape representative of that council. So my questions are very straightforward. Since we are not legislatively recognized as yet, according to Act number 3, we are never included in any budget. But yet there are things that are happening in the name of the Coincide. We know Coincide leaders are involved, that's with finances. And the last meeting I've attended with a department, Sports, Arts and Culture, the minister, the national minister, made statements publicly that there are chiefs and kings and queens that are getting paid. I don't know of which budget, but that placed my life in danger here in Cape Town. Look, I'm from the Western Cape. People are telling me you're getting money. I wonder from where, without legislation, without any budget. Then the Minister of Kokta had a meeting now, I think yesterday, in the meeting of the government with the National House of Traditional and Coincide leaders, and there were things like empowering women, youth and persons with disabilities, creating economic opportunities for marginalized communities, advancing constitutional equality for women. Where do I fit in with no budget? Is there oversight? There were things that happened with Minister Googling in 2013, where we had the Kimberley 1, the Kimberley 2, and we had no oversight of whatever budget was happening, but yet a farm was purchased like the Buckies, which was budgeted at 27 million, but the actual price of the farm was only 17 million. Where did the 10 million disappear to in the name of Coincide? So I would like the committee just to check who, the Department of Kokta, if they do these things, where we are never involved because of legislation, where does the money go to? So that to me is a very grave concern, and the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Gayton McKenzie, said that the traditional leadership gets 70 million rand a year. So if there's no money, where does the 70 million come from? I would like to know that the oversight will see to that. Is it true? How can government make such statements to the public, to the community, and then expect me as a community leader to stand and give answers which I don't know where to get? So can you just kindly attend to that urgently? Because there is even the smallest thing, like we have to engage in 4-hour-long virtual meetings, which we have to pay data and stuff like that out of our own pockets. We sign forms for reimbursement. It's 6 months along the line, and many of our community members are people that's not even employed. You sign these forms, but nothing comes from that. So whenever it comes to Coincide issues, there's never a budget, but there's money spent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think whoever... Yeah, just briefly.
Yeah. Firstly, Mercedes, I think, to be fair, I did respond to say that We have made a commitment to say, as part of the recommendations, that government departments must pay. Your question about whether there should be oversight in this regard, of course, I will naturally, without even anything, will ensure that we hold, as we hold them accountable for where they've paid service providers in the 30-day period, we will also hold them accountable for whether they've paid in an intergovernmental manner, because certain departments don't even pay for their water and electricity, which perils municipalities. So TV licenses are but one in the basket of things, and I'm happy to hold that oversight. We'll call them on board. There's no debate about that. They must pay. I didn't hear the president's statement about immediately. All I can say is that it is budgeted within the financial year. It must be paid for. I think it is, I would call it criminal behavior when one government fails to pay a next one. I think it hampers the services of the other. So I don't think we can debate the point. I think I did categorically state in this regard that that must be done, and I will hold the oversight position in this regard. I think, to you, ma'am, I want to abuse platform. I want to invite you to public hearings on Friday. Please make the submissions, because they must be recorded, and the Appropriations Committee will meet here. And if there are challenges with regards to how you participate in those public hearings, again, I will urge that from a parliamentary point of view, we figure out the best ways to facilitate you getting there. But I want to say democracy itself enjoins us to keep on top of all of these processes, so that ministers don't go out in public and make statements, I can't speak on the budget of arts and culture. All I can give effect to is once it's appropriated, that it is spent accordingly. So the commitments that Minister McKenzie has made, he has to account for those. I can't account on his behalf. But if there are representation of the Khoi and the San, which is an important constitutional imperative, I would invite you to public hearing on Friday, make the submissions, then we can make sure that they are tabled on the 5th of December in front of Parliament, so that we can take the conversation forward and take, so that it forms a resolution of the National Assembly relative to a lobbying process with the executive. So that would be my invitation to you. Thank you.
You forgot the other question.
Which
Are you
was?
going to take a cut as
Oh,
parliamentary?
personally?
I would no, I mean individually, all four of you.
Look,
I mean, I just the remuneration. I've asked that
I
question.
hear whether
what,
you want-
what are you saying? You say there's no money.
Mercedes, I think your question more specifically is whether you are asking whether I'll advocate or not advocate for the question. I've already indicated that there needs to be, at least there needs to be a public disposition that shows political leadership that says that we are in a fiscally tight position. Cut as much as you can. That's a reality, of which I'm part of the system. But I want to indicate the fact that salaries and adjustment of salaries represent one component of where this issue goes. You are correct, but there are big boulders ahead of us, of which debt is but one, 22 cents of that. There are other massive boulders relative to issues of corruption, relative to issues of wastage. So in the midst of all of the discussion about symbolically in a small component dealing with executive remuneration in this regard, let's also be deliberate about saying, how do we ensure that we advocate for dealing with some of the big boulders that sit? So on both fronts, it's not one or the other, right? So I again, when I look at the budget, I look at the votes that come through, we have to ask the big wastage program. Let me use a non-related example, for example. NSFAS, CETAs. These are agencies that in some ways do duplicate work. How do we focus on saying, rather than all the administration of higher education funding going through NSFAS, actually we capacitate universities to deal with students who are poor? That is part of the work that we've got to do. So I don't want us to walk out of here and say, well, the only thing we've got to do is make sure MPs don't get an increase. That is an easy one to do, but there are big boulders that sit in the system that must move the needle. Thank you.
Thank you. Mercedes, I'm sorry if I skipped that question. So part of the reason we're doing the quarterly reporting is making sure that creditors of all the entities are paid within the allocated time. Whether it is a municipality, it's a government department, and so maybe I should have addressed licenses specifically, but I think I dealt with a group of them. I spoke about even paying for the buildings in which they are. They don't pay public works and so on. So part of the reason we want these written reports, there are all of these things that the Auditor General highlights to say, you're not paying for your rent, you're not paying TV licenses, you're not paying auditors' fees, you're not paying the SIU and so on. We're going to have those on a table for each of the entities that we put in our sample and say, have you met your obligations in this regard? And the SABC falls into that category. So I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear, but the answer really is yes, we will do that, because these institutions suffer when government does not pay them for what they're already doing. And I want to say, I was a journalist. Journalists are workers. Journalists are workers. And one of the things South Africans do is they think this is work that can be done without anybody paying for them. People want free news, they want free newspapers, they want free subscriptions and so on. And yet journalists and journalism costs money. They have to be transported, accommodated, do high quality productions. Your working conditions have to be the right working conditions. I don't think in Parliament you will find a bigger friend of journalism than me and maybe a few people. So my commitment to journalism, not just to the SABC, is really deep. And therefore, from that perspective, I feel that we must do right by journalism. I also want to say, Mercedes, on the issue of retrenchments versus salaries, the point I was making is this. These institutions are in such financial distress that it's a miracle people are not losing their jobs. That's what I'm saying. And in many institutions, people are losing their jobs. And I can go right through the estate, whether it is Denel and so on, where they don't even have toilet paper sometimes. So in those situations where the institution is in financial distress, the one thing that I personally worry about, are people going to lose their jobs? And if people are able to keep their jobs, I'm grateful. That's the point I was making. I do want us to be, and once again, I will say the point because we don't want to talk about it. Money has been lost, stolen, and wasted. It's gone. It's hundreds of billions. We are in financial distress. Really, we are. If an institution is not able to buy toilet paper, that's a serious situation. Right? So it's important that we are honest with ourselves as South Africans. I want to implore us to do this. Because if we sit here and I lie to you, and I say it's possible to do certain things, you're going to catch me out in a few months' time and say, you said it's possible. I will not do that. There is a problem with money. And in that context, I don't think elected representatives should get salary increases when public servants don't. It's that simple. Let's treat everyone fairly. If there's no increase for somebody who works at public works, we shouldn't get one either.
Thank you very much. Let me first appreciate this platform. It's the first of its kind and it's ongoing. This is not the last session. It will be ongoing and appreciate the participation. Ours, and I'm sorry if I came out as defending government. Ours as the committees on behalf of the legislature is to make sure that there is effective oversight. Is also to make sure that those deployed in executive do account to Parliament. So issues that are raised here today have also empowered us as the standing committees or oversight committees. But also, it is to ensure that there is active citizenry. So this platform ensures that there's active citizenry, that members of the public, South Africans, do participate in the governing of the country. And these are the platforms, including the public participation. So we would really urge the citizens of the country to participate in governing of their country. Where the assertions, where public is required to make submissions, we will appreciate those submissions because they also assist us as oversight committees to do the oversight. So I thought, let me just, without responding to a specific question which was asked to my colleagues, but encourage the public to participate. This is democracy, this is the government of the people, for the people themselves. So for us, we really encourage and us as the Finance and Appropriations Committee is to make sure that the money, the public purse, is properly spent and budget allocated is properly used for what it is allocated for. And the public purse is secured. So that is our role, is to oversee that the budget is spent according to the needs of the people of South Africa. I thank you.
You didn't answer the one about the salary?
You're dialoguing as if we are writing a test. I think Honorable Maimane has responded to that. That is not just a straight line to say, no, never will you accept the cut on your salary. I mean, as public representatives, we approve the increase of the salary of the workers once we do not get the increase. So for us, it's not about money. It is about serving. It's not about salary. It's about serving the communities. And some of us, sometimes we even volunteer to do unpaid work. So that is not actually an issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me be brief, but Mercedes, let me firstly start by correcting you. It's not that National Treasury is going to fund the or pay the outstanding audit fees on behalf of municipalities. That's not true. The Audit Act does make provision that where there's a municipality where audit fees comprises more than 1% of its budget, there's certain mechanisms that's taken into account and where there's then intervention from the national fiscus. But that is what we are engaging on as committee. But it's not a general approach, and it's not that there's been such a decision that was taken. In general, we must remember that our problems in South Africa is not necessarily or isn't on what we spend money. For instance, building houses, RDP houses, they shouldn't be spending cuts on that. We shouldn't build less houses. But what we should look at is if I go and build a house, a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house, it's going to cost me X amount. Why is it that government is paying X multiplied by 100% or plus 100%? Why? It's not about the salaries that's being paid or the number of employees. It's that there was a practice for many years, and I was a government official, Mercedes, you know, in a ministry, so I know. The practice was for many years that someone is appointed in a political office with no experience in that department, and then that person is permanently appointed, seconded to the department, but has no function in that department. We have a lot of those officials still in our government departments that do not do any work. It's them that we should look at, not the public official that does do his job, not the public official that does have a contribution to society. And that gets me to the fact that, yes, we must all be responsible. For many, many years, as a parliamentarian, I did not receive any salary increase. There were 2013, 14, 15, we received nothing. And that's right. And maybe it's wrong that we did receive a couple of years now, but we did receive increases. We should all reflect and a message of fiscal discipline. We don't have money, but there is money that's being spent on not the wrong priorities, but where government is being exploited, where it's not wrong for a government official to stay in a hotel. The media will criticize the hotel expenditure of the public official. It's not. It's a fact that a normal accommodation in that hotel, if you go and book it, will cost 900 Rand in a night, but government is paying 5,000 Rand or 10,000 Rand. And in conclusion, our problems in South Africa started when we didn't care about each Rand and cent. We only cared. I used to serve in a provincial legislature, and when we in the Provincial Public Accounts Committee would, as opposition parties, make noise about 100,000 Rand irregular expenditure or a million Rand irregular expenditure, would we say, but it's only $1 million. It's only 100,000. Where are we now? And that's why we should be conscientious and provide our oversight, not in silos, as committees together, to be sure that each Rand and cent translates into value for money for the taxpayer, and so that we do have a future in this country of prosperity for all, that we eradicate poverty, and that we address inequality once and for all. Thank you.